All right, so when is not eating the answer? We're going to talk about the benefits and shortcomings of intermittent fasting. Yes, don't eat in bed. A little starvation can really do more for the average sick man than can the best medicines and the best doctors. Just a little quote to kind of make a segue. It's a quote Mark Twain said. It's really kind of the idea that fasting is not new. There's nothing new about fasting. It's kind of the buzz and all the rage now with this intermittent fasting going on. But the idea here is to highlight that there are some health benefits to fasting. Conventional nutritional advice is focused on eating several small, frequent meals throughout the day. How many times have we heard that? Small, frequent feeds throughout the day. And you'll hear advice like, never miss a meal, always eat breakfast, and make sure you snack throughout the day. Right? We've all heard that. If you're a fitness-conscious foodie like myself, how many out there? Yeah, that probably scares the shit out of you to not eat, right? The first time I heard about fasting, I'm like, no way I'm not doing that. Like, I'm going to whittle away to nothing. I'm going to shrink smaller than I already am. So, on the contrast, you'll see people, proponents of intermittent fasting, they kind of reject this idea of eating so often. They claim that people are going to get healthier, leaner, by deliberately skipping these meals. So the question is this just another nutritional fad, or is it a legitimate strategy for improving your health? So that's we're going to kind of go over in the next few slides, and then we'll kind of talk about strategies for intermittent fasting. So here's what we're going to try to cover in 20 minutes. Hang on tight. We're going to talk about what intermittent fasting is, the types, benefits, where some of the downfalls of fasting, and then some myths around fasting, and then some strategies to kind of successfully do fasting. So intermittent fasting isn't really a diet. It's a pattern of eating. So it's really just kind of alternating a period of eating, fasting, and eating. So it's just this alternating pattern of feed and skipping meals. We actually do some form of intermittent fasting every single day. We call this sleep. So if you took that slide that I just talked about of eating breakfast like a king and dinner like a pauper, then you're probably fasting for a certain period of time, especially if you're not staying up really late at night and eating dinner like 9 o'clock at night. You're probably getting in this at least maybe a 12-hour period of sleep, especially if you're not eating right in the morning. So your body's kind of already is built in to accommodate a fasting period. And like I said, it's not really new. It's been a part of various religious customs and practices across a variety of different religious practices. But now I think intermittent fasting is just kind of taking on more of a secular form. And there's a lot of different types of fasting out there. I'm sure those of you who have tried intermittent fasting, it looks and feels differently to everyone. I kind of break it up into two different categories. One's an all-day fast, and then there's this time-restricted feeding. You'll hear kind of in the literature this TRF for the time-restricted feeding. And they are what they sound. So an all-day fast really kind of breaks down into a 24-hour fast, an alternate day fast, and a 5-2 fast. These are some of the common protocols out there. 24-hour fast is pretty much as the name implies. You're kind of fasting for a 24-hour period. Essentially, you're really just kind of eating a single meal a day. So if you make breakfast that meal, you're not eating again until breakfast the next day. This tends to be fairly easily incorporated into life because, you're kind of able to take, somebody asked about taking their supplements or medications with food. Sometimes they have to do that. So, breakfast is a great time to do that if you make that your one meal of the day. A lot of times, sometimes we get really busy at work anyways. We totally skip lunch and miss lunch, and you get kind of going, get home late, you hit the gym, and then it's like 8 o'clock. Then There may be a time and a decision of like, hey, am I going to make this my intermittent fasting day? And then just eat breakfast the next morning. So that's a 24-hour fast. It's really not complicated. You pick one meal. It doesn't have to be breakfast. It can be any meal of the day. We'll talk about which meal may actually be the best when it comes down to the literature. A similar version on this is an alternate day fast. It's a bit of a misnomer because an alternate day fast, by its pure protocol, you're actually taking about 500 calories a day in during an alternate day fast. Why are you doing this? Because alternate day fasting is usually strung together over a longer period of time. So the goal for alternate day fast is actually to do kind of multiple rounds of alternate day fasting. So to make the compliance a little bit easier, they allow for just a minimal number of calories. 500 calories, they're thought, is still kind of thought to be just enough to kind of mimic the same hormonal patterns that real, full-on fasting will do. So that's why you're kind of limiting the number of calories, because you're going to kind of string this on for several days and weeks at a time. 5-2 fast. This is kind of one of the fasts that really popularized intermittent fasting. And again, it's a no-brainer. Kind of self-explanatory. 5-2. You feed on 5 days, you fast on 2 days. Same idea as the alternate. If you want to do like a true 5-2 fast, it's the same 500 calorie feeding on the 2 days of fasting. Usually I recommend that you space this out so it's not like a Tuesday, Wednesday. It's like a Tuesday, Thursday. You stagger your days. Part of the idea behind this is a little bit of kind of confusion theory. How many people kind of heard that phrase? Maybe it applies to workouts. I know people who go to OTF all know about confusion theory. Yeah, I heard a little woo-woo, OTFers. So the idea is you kind of put in a little bit of confusion theory into the hormones and adjusting to the feed. So those are kind of your all-day fasts. You can just do a full 24-hour fast do a kind of one meal and again 24 hours later, or you can do this more frequent pattern of either every other day or 2 days a week of this 500 calorie fast. All right, switching gears, time-restricted fasting. Here you are basically shortening down the window of feeding. That's the easiest way to think about it. We're going to shorten down the feed window during the day. Lean gains and warrior diet are kind of the two more popular ones. If you've experimented with fasting or done some reading on fasting, you'll probably seen one of these two out there. Both created by bodybuilders or the lean gains is basically, again, it's not rocket science. They labeled it as it sounds. You're fasting for 6 hours and you're feeding during 8 hours. Okay, so that's how the lean gains protocol works. Fairly simple to incorporate into everyday life. This one can look at like skipping breakfast and kind of feeding in that next 8-hour window, or kind of vice versa, kind of skipping dinner, having a longer prolonged fast overnight, feeding breakfast, lunch.
Sorry, it's fast 16, feed 8?
Correct. Yep. Fast 16, feed 8. Same thing for the warrior diet. Fast 20 hours, feed 4 hours. The guy who created this one kind of pulled it off of inspiration from kind of the ancient warrior tribes where they're kind of out hunting and gathering all day long. They're kind of having that period of feeding in the evening time. They sleep, wake up, repeat, and go gather or hunt for food is the idea behind this. The two important concepts here when you actually look at these, they take it a little bit beyond just fasting and feeding during set interval periods. This is not to say you can eat donuts for the 4 hours and then fast for 20 hours. Most of these protocols were actually focused on high quality, unprocessed foods, and most of these are tagging on some, forms of exercise training. Lean gains and warrior diet will also throw kind of a hit. High intensity interval training. I know some of you are probably familiar with that concept. So they kind of pair high quality, unprocessed foods, kind of the Michael Pollan diet, Mediterranean diet, some of these other diets. I don't think Sheldon has me talking about nutrition, but we all kind of know what a good diet's supposed to look like. Brussels sprouts and salmon. And that's what they're actually putting during the feeding periods of time. So the main take-home message here is we're really just kind of shrinking the eating window and expanding the fasting window. Okay? Don't make it complicated. Don't worry about is it 20 or 4 or 16 or 8 or it's just shrink the feeding window. I already kind of mentioned some of the commonalities here is the natural unprocessed foods. So that's kind of the commonality with the fasting. I think there was one other point I was going to make, but I was going to make it the point of when is potentially the best time to feed and fast. There are these different protocols out there. They're time-based, so you can swap them and have different times where you feed during the day. Kind of based on my previous lecture, based upon circadian rhythm. One of the most optimal times as it relates to hormones, including the hormone insulin, which is a really important regulator, and some of your other hormones that control appetite, like ghrelin, adiponectin, some of these things, is kind of ideal to time that. If you're going to do one meal, time it around the lunchtime, because you're not going to be affecting kind of having that big meal that I told you not to be doing right before bed, and getting. And then some people obviously don't want to have kind of that big meal in the breakfast. So there's actually some emerging literature to show that if you're going to do these fasting protocols, lunchtime is the best time to do the feeding.
I don't know if you're going to get into this, but depending on when you work out, the best time to eat.
Yeah. So kind of different strategies on different individuals will respond to fasting and working out differently. I have some patients that can do just fine working off on a fast and continue taking that fast forward. And then pick the type of fasting that works best for you. Okay. So one of my tips is going to be fit fasting into your life and not the other way around. So don't build your life around fasting. Build the fasting around your life. So if you're one of these individuals that I'm always going to work out in the morning and I can't tackle the rest of my day with no food in my stomach, then it sounds like breakfast is not your time to fast. There are some other tips that I'll go over that makes fasting a little bit easier. So what are some of the important things that happens to our body when we fast? Just a little bit of science, just so you know I'm not up here just kind of talking out of my ass, and there is some science behind this. Growth hormone increases when we fast, okay? It's one of the, probably one of the most potent natural stimuluses or stimuli to growth hormone release besides shooting growth hormone into our bodies. Is going to be fasting. It acts as kind of like a counter-regulatory hormone. What does that mean? It basically signals the body to increase the availability of glucose. And so it's going to start mobilizing glucose stores, mobilizing fat stores. It's going to start revving up enzymes that break down fat and put that as a fuel source into the bloodstream. That's important. Adrenaline increases. Why is this important? Most people think that they're concerned that fasting is going to leave them feeling tired and worn out and fatigued. Your body actually compensates for this by increasing adrenaline. Back to Sheldon's video that he asked you guys to watch that we all watched, and we talked about the endorphins. That kind of pool all work off of adrenaline derivatives. So endorphins are built off of the backbone of kind of adrenaline and derivatives thereof. So this is also another counter-regulatory hormone that's going to start mobilizing those enzymes in the body that break down fat and shuttle those fuel sources into the bloodstream. So you're actually not going to end up feeling just kind of tired and fatigued all the time. So insulin levels go down. Why is that important?
Diabetes risk?
Yeah, so glucose control as it relates to kind of diabetes risk. High insulin levels are a potent stimulator of inflammation. Chronic inflammation is linked to all sorts of chronic diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, depression. I can go on. As insulin levels come down, you're also able to have kind of better insulin sensitivity as well. So this is kind of a good thing because high insulin levels are kind of a root cause to many diseases. All right, what are some of the benefits of intermittent fasting? Again, a little more science. We know it's going to improve kind of 3 different things. Cardiovascular health. It's going to improve blood pressure. We talked about inflammation. It's going to bring inflammation levels down. We actually see a drop in high sensitive CRP, which is a marker. Some of those of you who kind of work with Dr. J know they test inflammation levels, and you'll see levels drop. It's going to improve blood lipids. So everyone's kind of know they need to get their cholesterol checked and monitored because that may be one of the factors that contribute to heart disease. This is going to improve kind of the bad cholesterol, the lousy cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol. Metabolic health, we already kind of talked about this a little bit with kind of blood sugar and appetite control, how it kind of regulates some of the hormones to actually improve kind of appetite control so you're not going around hungry all the time. Increasing that adrenaline is actually going to increase metabolic rate. How many people have always kind of concerned have been told that your metabolic rate is going to slow if you fast? Your body has counter-regulatory mechanisms for this. Cellular health. Basically, here fasting is going to increase cell turnover and repair in the body. Why is that important? It's important for a whole host of issues. We're not old enough to be quite concerned about dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that, but it can kind of turn over brain cells. So it is kind of important, though, to kind of help kind of clear neural pathways. It can increase neuroplasticity. Has anyone heard of neuroplasticity? Yeah. So it can actually improve neuroplasticity, which is basically kind of think about it as rewiring and reconnecting of kind of brain pathways that, hey, we know you can't actually increase the number of brain cells, but you can actually change and wire and connect up more brain cells together. So that's kind of cool. All right, so what are the shortcomings? I just talked about a lot of cool benefits to fasting. Is this really just kind of some sort of fad? So one is kind of the research is lagging. It's really starting to catch up, but when people started putting out like the 5-2-fast protocols, the research was kind of lagged behind a little bit. It was mostly on rodents. Now we're starting to see some human studies being introduced that kind of backs up some of the science behind the fasting. And there's a lot of confounding variables within the literature as well. Remember how I kind of mentioned that these fasting protocols didn't just look kind of fasting. They kind of made certain prescriptions for the quality of food, the exercise, the things that you're doing with the fasts. So there's a lot of these unique variations with the fast. It's kind of hard to say like, hey, the 24 is the way to go, the 16-8 is the way to go, this 5-2 is the way to go. There's a lot of these variations. So it could be just plausible that eating fewer calories than you burn, eating a diet low in processed foods, low with chemical pollutants, that unto itself is what's getting all the health benefit, maybe not the fasting itself. I don't think so, but counter arguments to fasting could be just that. All right, so what are some of these myths about fasting? We've kind of touched on some of them as we've gone through. Fasting will cause muscle wasting. No, breakdown of muscle tissue only happens at low levels of body fat. How low? You get a dip below 4 to 5% body fat. Not even Sheldon is walking around with 5% body fat. Okay, so you have to get pretty low before you start going into catabolism here. Okay, interesting. There's some studies that showed it, like looking at the alternate day fasting that I was talking about, where you just kind of fast, feed for 70 days. And it was able to decrease total fat mass by 11% without a change in muscle mass. Okay, 10% drop in body fat, no change in muscle mass. 70 days of alternating fasting. That's a long time. And we already kind of talked about why this happens. Adrenaline, growth hormone increasing. Fasting is going to starve the brain. Has anyone heard that before? There's a couple people heard that. How many people know about the ketogenic diet? Okay, so you're familiar with this concept that there are ketones, that there are these ketone bodies that the body releases when you start kind of shifting the macronutrients away from carbohydrates. The brain can fuel off of these ketone bodies. If you talk to people who've done ketogenic diets, a lot of them will actually tell you that there's this mental clarity that happens over time. Okay, they actually think more clearly because your body can use the ketones and not just glucose, not just blood sugar. So fasting will not starve the brain. It wouldn't make sense for our brains evolutionary to, fast and go through a period of fast and the brain shuts down.
Hey, Will?
Yep.
Sierra? Can you step over real quick? Well, yeah. I just have to do this real quick. So Sierra, you started ketogenic diet? How long ago?
A little less than 4 months ago, like maybe 3.5 months.
How much weight did you lose?
I actually weighed myself today, and I'm 44 pounds down.
We were talking about how to bring her on. It's an incredible story.
Well done. All right, so we do this thing. We do this thing we call the 1, 2, 3 clap. So 1, 2, 3. All right, well done. All right, fasting will decrease metabolism. We already kind of talked about this one. I want to kind of skip over this since we already kind of talked about why that's the case. There was one cool study that looked at fasting for 4 days. It's not quite an intermittent fasting, but it showed that adrenaline levels increased by 100%, increasing resting metabolic rate by 12%. Okay, so I'm not just kind of pulling this stuff out of my butt like I said. Fasting leads to overeating. There is some partial truth to this. And the partial truth is that after the fast, there's usually an average increase of about 500 calorie increased consumption right after the fast. But if you look over the full 24-hour period of the fast and refeed, there's usually still an average caloric deficit of 2,000 calories. Okay, so long as you're not overfeeding 500 calories with donuts and pizza, you're still doing yourself, an overall benefit with the intermittent fasting protocol. It's okay if you kind of have a little bit of overfeeding because you feel hungry. That long as you're keeping that total caloric deficit over that 48-hour period of time, you're probably doing okay. All right, so what are some final tips and tricks for successful fasting? I can see some people pulling out their notebooks now, trying to scribble down what I'm saying really fast. Staying well hydrated is really important. Okay, so this is really important that you kind of hitting those 6 to 8 ounces, 6 to 8 ounce servings of 8 ounces of water. You're getting at least 8 of those 6 ounce or 8. I can't even do it. I'm trying to go way too quick and get it in here so I can get this whole thing in before we leave. Stay well hydrated. That's going to help with the dizziness and kind of the headaches sometimes people will talk about when they fasting. So, when you're waking up in the morning, very first thing you do, you should be downing one of these bottles of water. Probably not this bottle, but we can talk about that later. In the men's, women's health lectures I talk about tomorrow, we will be talking about environmental toxins and plastics. Yes, I'm drinking out of it too. Stay well hydrated. Keeping busy during a work day is another good strategy. Remember how I told you sometimes you can kind of pick that morning fast and then just crush work and not even realize you were hungry. See some people kind of shaking their heads. They kind of do that already anyways. So if you're kind of too busy, you're probably not going to feel those kind of waves of hunger. Waves of hunger, ride those waves. It's more of a state of your mind than it actually kind of a state of stomach. It's really kind of driven mentally. It's a learned phenomenon where kind of social cues are taught. Kind of how I talked, mentioned in the beginning of the lecture that we're kind of told, eat several frequent meals throughout the day. Have meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's kind of it's a social cue thing. We often imagine that this hunger is going to build and build and build till we can't tolerate it any longer. Usually the hunger subsides way before that. some strategies I said I was going to mention about how to make this easier, especially when you're trying to work out at kind of different times of days. The water hydration is going to prevent that hunger. Coffee and tea will help kind of suppress your appetite as well. You can use that on a lot of these intermittent fasts. So let me crush this and I'll get the question. Cinnamon, if you use kind of cinnamon in teas or on foods, cinnamon slows gastric emptying time. So that if you're going to do that one feed of the day, you're actually kind of going to slow the release and digestion of that food. So cinnamon's kind of one sort of strategy to help. The final thing I will kind of do is some starts, you kind of get a little bit of some cheats going on. Branched chain amino acids. Comes in a little powder form, BCAAs. You can sip on those. A lot of times that will help curb some of the hunger pains when you're kind of going through it. It's just enough. A lot of times I find it's best to time those at the natural meals you're going to have. So say if you had breakfast and you're going to skip lunch and dinner, just plan to have BCAAs with that water, and you'll find that it just kind of curbs the hunger pains. If you really feel like you need to resort to some food, something like chia seeds or chia seed puddings will be super low calorie. We all kind of know what chia seeds do, where they look like they kind of expand and have that gel form. It's to really kind of fill your stomach up, kind of be like a long-acting fuel source, if you will. So that's another strategy as well. Don't tell everyone that you're fasting. Maybe tell other like-minded individuals in the room, but if they're not health conscious, if they're not biohackers, don't be telling them that you're fasting. Why? They're going to talk you out of it. They're going to tell you, Dr. Haas is full of shit. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't do this. It's bad. It's dangerous. They're going to tell you all the myths that we just busted, and they're going to discourage you. And that's kind of hard to do sometimes when everyone around you is discouraging you. So you're going to tell some supportive groups of people. With that said, kind of give it a month. It takes time for your body to get used to this. Okay, the first few times that you're going to do it, it's probably going to be a little bit difficult. That you're breaking those social cues. You're breaking those cues, the brain cues that you're hungry. It's going to get easier as you do it. It gets easier and easier as you do it, especially if you're using some of these strategies that we talked about. Okay, don't binge. We already kind of talked about the natural tendency to kind of overeat. Again, just kind of be cautious on not overeating after you break your fast. A good strategy there is kind of do like a small snack before you do that big meal. So you can just introduce just a small calorie, 200 calorie feed before you try to hit 3,000 calories as your next feed. So kind of try to eat normally and maybe put a small snack before. Follow a nutritious diet. I kind of already talked about this. Make sure the intermittent fasting is not an excuse to just kind of eat whatever you want and hit donuts on the non-fasting days. We can talk more about different healthy diets and the campfire discussions if you want there. And then, of course, I mentioned it already. Fit fasting into your life. Don't change your life to fit your fasting into your schedule. Change your fasting schedule to fit your life. And there's going to be some times where this just not going to work. Don't try this over holidays. Not smart. Okay. Don't do this when you're going to be stressed out and your immune system's kind of weak and like you're just kind of overworked, or when you're going through like a big training cycle. For those people who are kind of like the big fitness junkies in here, if you're going through a really hard part of the training cycle, that's probably not the time to try to tackle it. You need the fuel for your body. You don't want to do it during those times. It's just going to add more stress. There's kind of that idea that you only have so much self-will to tap into in any given day. There's this theory, proven psychological theory, that eventually by the end of the day you're going to exhaust your will capacity. And if you're trying so hard at certain things, eventually something's going to give. So make sure you're setting yourself up for success. Probably not a big issue in this room with medications. There's some medications that you're going to need to adjust. Blood sugar, blood pressure medications, things like that. Probably not a big issue here. Track your results. So this is important for anything we do for high performers and achieving. You're going to want to have objective proof of your results. So pick a form of intermittent fasting that works for you. Commit to doing it for 1 month. Make sure you measure objective things that will give you feedback on how that's going. Okay, this is not just kind of like, Yeah, I think it's working well. You actually want to do, and that can look differently to different people. You can do body measurements, pictures, body fat composition. You can usually do body composition analysis. Look at kind of those objective measures. And then look at it over time and know that there's going to be ups and downs. So if you said, I'm going to do it for a month, don't get discouraged at week 2 if you kind of do that, 1 step back, 2 step forward deal. Wait until the end of that period and you probably have succeeded. And if you haven't, look at why, see what we can do to tweak that plan and try it again. All right.
It's 3 minutes now, so save these questions for the fireside chat, because I'm sure you will. Thanks for drinking that through.
Yep.
Stephanie, do we have some housekeeping?